Canelo Alvarez, period. The company you fought under for he has always dared to be great, just as he's this saddle for him. Remember when Jaime was 21 years old, volunteered to step in against triple.
Picture this, two grown men, multimillionaires, absolute titans of the sport of boxing, surrounded by hundreds of flashing cameras, high-stakes executives, and a crowd holding its collective breath. On one side sits Saul Canelo Alvarez, the undisputed king of the super middleweight division, a stoic, cold-blooded executioner who usually keeps his composure tighter than a sealed vault. On the other side sits Oscar De La Hoya, the golden boy himself, Hall of Famer, former idol turned promoter, looking cool, sharp, and entirely deliberate. Then, without warning, the atmosphere ruptures. Oscar steps up to the microphone, adjusts his suit, and delivers a venomous, calculated speech designed to cut straight to Canelo's core. He claims he built the legend of Canelo, demanding respect for Golden Boy promotions. Canelo's jaw tightens. His face turns beet red. In a fraction of a second, the cool-headed superstar snaps. He leaps out of his chair, muttering furious Spanish slurs, his eyes locked onto De La Hoya. He lunges forward, not for a staged press conference shove, but with real, unadulterated, raw hatred. Security guards, suits, and trainers scramble in total panic, bodily throwing themselves between the two men as Canelo screams, "Don't you talk to me like that. You're a thief. You're a parasite." The viral footage sent shockwaves through the entire combat sports world. Millions watched in utter disbelief as the father-son, mentor-protege bond melted into pure toxicity right before our eyes. But what the casual fan saw on screen was just the tip of a massive, ugly iceberg. This wasn't a fight over a single contract or a stray comment to the media. This was the violent explosion of a decade-long saga filled with betrayal, secret lawsuits, millions of stolen dollars, backstabbing, and personal insults that hit way below the belt. How did the most profitable alliance in boxing history crumble into a bloodthirsty feud? What was said behind closed doors that turned a legendary mentor into Canelo's absolute worst enemy? Strap in, because we are unpacking every dirty secret, every broken promise, and the exact moment this war became irreversible. Title: Oscar De La Hoya and Canelo Alvarez heat up in new viral footage. Hook: the breaking point. Picture this, two grown men, multimillionaires, absolute titans of the sport of boxing, surrounded by hundreds of flashing cameras, high-stakes executives, and a crowd holding its collective breath. On one side sits Saul Canelo Alvarez, the undisputed king of the super middleweight division, a stoic, cold-blooded executioner who usually keeps his composure tighter than a sealed vault. On the other side sits Oscar De La Hoya, the golden boy himself, Hall of Famer, former idol turned promoter, looking cool, sharp, and entirely deliberate. Then, without warning, the atmosphere ruptures. Oscar steps up to the microphone, adjusts his suit, and delivers a venomous, calculated speech designed to cut straight to Canelo's core. He claims he built the legend of Canelo, demanding respect for Golden Boy promotions. Canelo's jaw tightens. His face turns beet red. In a fraction of a second, the cool-headed superstar snaps. He leaps out of his chair, muttering furious Spanish slurs, his eyes locked onto De La Hoya. He lunges forward, not for a staged press conference shove, but with real, unadulterated, raw hatred. Security guards, suits, and trainers scramble in total panic, bodily throwing themselves between the two men as Canelo screams, "Don't you talk to me like that. You're a thief. You're a parasite." The viral footage sent shockwaves through the entire combat sports world. Millions watched in utter disbelief as the father-son, mentor-protege bond melted into pure toxicity right before our eyes. But what the casual fan saw on screen was just the tip of a massive, ugly iceberg. This wasn't a fight over a single contract or a stray comment to the media. This was the violent explosion of a decade-long saga filled with betrayal, secret lawsuits, millions of stolen dollars, backstabbing, and personal insults that hit way below the belt. How did the most profitable alliance in boxing history crumble into a bloodthirsty feud? What was said behind closed doors that turned a legendary mentor into Canelo's absolute worst enemy? Strap in, because we are unpacking every dirty secret, every broken promise, and the exact moment this war became irreversible. Part 1. The Golden Empire and the Seeds OFDCEIT. To understand why Canelo Alvarez was ready to tear Oscar De La Hoya's head off in front of the entire world, you have to rewind the clock back to 2010. Canelo was just a 19-year-old kid from Guadalajara, Mexico. He had fiery red hair, freckles, and a left hook that could put a horse to sleep. But in the grand scheme of American boxing, he was raw clay waiting to be molded. Enter Oscar De La Hoya, the head of Golden Boy Promotions. Oscar wasn't just any promoter, he was an international icon. He possessed the charismatic smile, the Olympic gold medal, and the crossover mainstream appeal that every fighter dreamed of having. When Oscar looked at young Canelo, he didn't just see a talent, he saw a cash machine. He saw the heir to the Mexican boxing throne, the successor to Julio Cesar Chavez, and the man who could carry Golden Boy Promotions for the next 15 years. For a long time, the dynamic looked like a fairy tale. Oscar mentored the young Mexican star, showing him the ropes of American pay-per-view markets, building his brand, and matching him meticulously against guys who would test him without ruining his record. Golden Boy put Canelo on massive undercards, groomed him on HBO, and eventually built him into a pay-per-view monster. Canelo looked up to Oscar like an older brother, a hero who had walked the path before him and was now guiding him to the peak of the mountain. In 2018, that partnership reached what seemed like its absolute peak. Golden Boy negotiated a mind-boggling, record-breaking $365 million deal over 11 fights with the streaming service DAZN. It was the richest contract in sports history at the time. Canelo was set for life, Golden Boy was set for life, and the sport had a new titan. On paper, they were unstoppable. But off-camera, behind the thick wooden doors of Golden Boy's executive offices, the foundation was already cracking. The first major crack appeared as early as 2013, right after Canelo suffered the first loss of his professional career against Floyd Mayweather Jr. Canelo was only 23 years old, stepping into the ring against a defensive genius, and he was completely outclassed over 12 rounds. He was heartbroken, embarrassed, and desperate for support from his team and his promoter. Where was Oscar De La Hoya on the night of the biggest fight of Canelo's life? He was absent. Just days before the event, Oscar had checked himself back into a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in California. Canelo felt completely abandoned on the biggest stage imaginable. But worse than Oscar's physical absence were the comments De La Hoya made after the fight. Instead of standing by his young star, Oscar publicly criticized Canelo's head trainer and father figure, Eddie Reynoso. De La Hoya went to the media and blurted out that Canelo needed a new trainer, suggesting that Eddie didn't have the high-level experience to take Canelo to the next level. That was a cardinal sin in Canelo's book. Eddie Reynoso wasn't just a trainer, he was family. He was the man who had trained Canelo since he was a scrawny 13-year-old kid in Guadalajara. When Oscar insulted Eddie, he insulted Canelo. The Mexican star kept quiet publicly out of respect for their business contract, but the resentment began to fester deep within him. Canelo realized right then that Oscar De La Hoya cared about one thing above all else, Oscar De La Hoya. As the years went on, the rift widened. Canelo started noticing that Golden Boy was making promises to networks and fighters without his knowledge. Oscar would go on television and announce fights that Canelo had never even agreed to. De La Hoya was acting like the puppet master, assuming his star fighter would just nod, smile, and jump into the ring whenever he clicked his fingers. But Canelo wasn't a scared teenager anymore, he was becoming the face of global boxing, and he wanted absolute control over his career. The tension reached a boiling point in late 2019. Golden Boy had promised DAZN that Canelo would fight his arch-rival, Gennady Golovkin, for a third time. DAZN had paid the $365 million check specifically expecting that trilogy fight to happen. The problem? Oscar had never actually secured Canelo's signature for it. Canelo felt Golovkin didn't deserve an immediate rematch at that moment and wanted to pursue light heavyweight glory against Sergey Kovalev instead. When Oscar couldn't deliver the Golovkin fight, DAZN began withholding payments. Suddenly, the massive $365 million empire came crashing down like a house of cards. Oscar began scrambling, trying to force Canelo into taking massive pay cuts or taking fights he didn't want. Canelo had seen enough. He hired high-powered lawyers, combed through every single contract Golden Boy had ever signed on his behalf, and what he discovered made his blood boil. He realized Golden Boy was making side agreements that compromised his earnings and his reputation. In September 2020, Canelo dropped a megaton bomb on the boxing world. He filed a massive breach of contract lawsuit in a U.S. federal court against Golden Boy Promotions and DAZN, demanding $280 million in damages. The fairy tale was officially dead. When a fighter sues his own promoter, it's usually dirty. But when the most famous Mexican fighter on earth sues the most famous Mexican-American promoter on earth, it's an all-out nuclear war. The legal battle forced all of Golden Boy's dirty laundry into the open light. Court documents revealed a shocking breakdown in communication. It turned out that Golden Boy had signed a contract with DAZN promising specific Canelo fights, while simultaneously signing a completely different contract with Canelo that gave him total veto power over his opponents. Oscar had played a high-stakes game of poker, gambling that he could manipulate both sides into doing what he wanted. He lost that gamble spectacularly. Canelo felt deeply betrayed, not just as an elite athlete, but on a personal level. In every interview he gave during that period, you could hear the sheer disgust in his voice. He openly called Oscar a snake, warning other young fighters to stay away from Golden Boy. He claimed Oscar didn't care about his fighters' health, their careers, or their families, only about funding his own lavish lifestyle and keeping his name in the headlines. Eventually, to avoid an embarrassing, drawn-out trial that could have destroyed Golden Boy Promotions entirely, Oscar settled the suit. Canelo was granted his complete release from Golden Boy, instantly becoming the most powerful free agent in boxing history. He took control of his own promotional entity, Canelo Promotions, negotiated his own deals with rival networks like PBC and Matchroom, and went on an absolute tear, unifying the entire super middleweight division in just 11 months. Canelo thought he had left Oscar De La Hoya in his rearview mirror forever. He was winning titles, earning guaranteed 50s of millions per fight, and running his own empire. But Oscar couldn't let it go. Seeing Canelo thrive without him was a bitter pill for De La Hoya to swallow. Every time Canelo fought, Oscar would jump on social media or fire up a podcast to trash his former star. If Canelo won a decision, Oscar called it boring. If Canelo fought a champion, Oscar claimed the opponent was cherry-picked. Oscar started posting his weekly Clapback Thursdays videos on Instagram, regularly mocking Canelo's fights, his golf addiction, and his refusal to fight certain contenders. It was a relentless campaign of petty psychological warfare. Oscar was acting like a bitter ex-partner who couldn't stand seeing their former love succeed with someone else. And Canelo was taking mental notes of every single shot. The hatred simmered quietly beneath the surface for 4 long years. The two men avoided being in the same room. When they attended the same boxing events, security made sure their entourages crossed paths on opposite ends of the arena. It was a cold war that everyone in boxing knew couldn't last forever. Eventually, the sport's tight ecosystem would force these two powerful forces back into the exact same room. That moment finally came in May 2024, when Canelo agreed to defend his undisputed super middleweight championship against a rising Mexican contender named Jaime Munguia. Munguia was young, undefeated, hungry, and wildly exciting. There was just one massive problem: Jaime Munguia was promoted by Oscar De La Hoya and Golden Boy Promotions. To make the fight, Canelo had to do business with the company he hated. He insisted on strict contractual terms to ensure he wouldn't have to interact directly with Oscar during negotiations. But when Fight Week arrived in Las Vegas, the mandatory press conferences meant there was no place left to hide. The stage was set at the MGM Grand. On the dais sat Canelo, his trainer Eddie Reynoso, Jaime Munguia, and Oscar De La Hoya. The air in that room was so thick with tension you could cut it with a razor blade. The media, the security detail, the executives, everyone knew that putting a loaded microphone in front of Oscar De La Hoya while Canelo Alvarez sat 3 feet away was like tossing a burning match into a room full of gasoline. And what happened next went viral within minutes across every corner of the internet. Oscar De La Hoya didn't just walk up to the microphone to promote Jaime Munguia, he walked up to detonate a bomb. He pulled out a pre-written, printed speech, looked over his reading glasses, and took aim straight at Canelo's chest. He started speaking in deliberate, calculated English, ensuring the international media wouldn't miss a single word. "I have nothing but respect for Canelo Alvarez as a fighter," Oscar began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "His record and abilities speak for themselves. But he has spent much of the last 2 months insulting me rather than promoting this fight. Yes, I've faced a lot of challenges in my life. Yes, I've been to rehab several times. But that doesn't change the fact that Golden Boy built Canelo Alvarez, period. The company you fought under for decades has always had one name, and it's mine, so put some **ing respect on it. The company you fought under for decades has always had one name, and it's mine, so put some **ing respect on it." Oscar De La Hoya. The room gasped. Behind him, Canelo's expression transformed from mild annoyance to absolute, unadulterated rage. Canelo didn't wait for his turn at the podium. He stood straight up out of his chair, his body trembling with anger, and cut Oscar off right at the microphone. "Don't you talk to me like that!" Canelo roared in English, stepping directly into Oscar's personal space. "Don't you talk to me like that!" Oscar, staying cool and smirking, tried to dismiss him, saying, "Or what? You're just a slobbering fool." That was it. The dam broke. Canelo lost his mind. Switching rapidly into rapid-fire, aggressive Spanish, Canelo began unleashing a barrage of insults that stunned every reporter in attendance. "You're a dumbass!" Canelo shouted, pointing his finger inches from Oscar's face. "You don't write anything yourself. You're an idiot with an image, that's all you are. The people behind you do all the work while you just steal." Security personnel instantly swarmed the stage, physically throwing their bodies between the two men as Canelo made a move toward De La Hoya. Oscar stood his ground, maintaining a mocking grin, but his body language showed he knew he had pushed the Mexican champion to the absolute brink. Canelo wasn't done. When he finally got his official turn at the microphone, he delivered a scathing, uncensored verbal execution of his former promoter. Looking straight into the cameras, Canelo exposed what he claimed was Oscar's true nature. He accused Oscar of attempting to steal money from him during their time together, claiming that if it weren't for Canelo's own legal team, Golden Boy would have robbed him blind. He dropped another massive accusation, claiming Oscar had done the same thing to Gennady Golovkin. "The only thing he does is be a parasite in boxing," Canelo declared, his voice ringing out across the press room. "He comes here only to steal the spotlight from Jaime Munguia. He's not here to promote his fighter. He's a piece of trash who steals from everyone who works with him. Whoever signs with him, make sure you have a good lawyer, because he will steal from you." The footage of this jaw-dropping exchange exploded on social media within seconds. Millions of fans replayed the clip over and over, dissecting every micro-expression, every curse word, and the sheer terror on the faces of the organizers sitting nearby. It was the rawest, most unscripted, and most authentically hateful confrontation boxing had seen in a decade. Notice the dynamic. Jaime Munguia, the man who was actually supposed to be fighting Canelo, was completely erased from the picture. He sat quietly in his suit, looking around like a child stuck in the middle of a messy divorce trial. Oscar had successfully turned the entire event into a show about himself and Canelo. But did Oscar push Canelo too far? Did he awaken a dangerous monster right before his young fighter was scheduled to step into the ring with the undisputed champion? What happened immediately after the cameras stopped rolling proves that this war is far from over. When the press conference ended and security escorted both camps out through separate exits, the tension didn't dissipate, it mutated into legal and psychological warfare. Within 24 hours of the near brawl, Oscar De La Hoya's legal team sent formal cease-and-desist letters to Canelo Alvarez, threatening a massive defamation lawsuit over Canelo's public accusations that Oscar was a thief who tried to steal money. Canelo's response? Complete and total indifference. When reporters asked him about the legal threats, Canelo laughed it off, telling them Oscar could sue all he wanted because he had the documents and proof to back up every single word he said. On fight night, Canelo channeled all that raw, venomous rage into his performance. He took out his frustration on Oscar's fighter, Jamie Munguia. After a competitive start, Canelo dropped Munguia with a vicious, perfectly timed uppercut in the 4th round, systematically dismantling the younger man over 12 dominant rounds to retain his undisputed championship. As Canelo celebrated in the center of the ring with his hands raised, he glared directly over at Oscar De La Hoya, who was forced to watch his star prospect get outclassed while sitting ringside. It was a physical statement to match the verbal destruction from earlier in the week. Canelo had beaten Oscar in the courtroom, he had humiliated him at the press conference, and now he had beaten his fighter inside the squared circle. Yet, despite taking loss after loss in this rivalry, Oscar De La Hoya refuses to wave the white flag. Why? Because in the twisted business of professional boxing, hate sells better than love. The feud between Canelo and Oscar has become one of the biggest driving forces for fan engagement in the entire sport. Every time Oscar mentions Canelo's name, it makes front-page news. Every time Canelo fires back, the videos rack up tens of millions of views on YouTube and TikTok. They have become the definitive arch-enemies of modern boxing, two legends representing completely different eras, mentalities, and business models. Oscar represents the old guard, the flamboyant, promoter-first era where fighters were tied to long-term contracts and the promotional company controlled every aspect of the athlete's life. Canelo represents the modern era, the self-promoted, athlete-empowered model where fighters own their rights, control their own destinies, and dictate their own terms. When they clashed on that stage, it wasn't just a personal fight between two men who hate each other's guts, it was a battle for the soul and control of modern boxing. As we look to the future, one thing is abundantly clear, this rivalry will never end with a handshake or a quiet reconciliation. The bridge between Saul Canelo Alvarez and Oscar De La Hoya has not just been burned, it has been reduced to ashes. Canelo has made it explicitly clear that as long as he breathes, he will never work with Golden Boy Promotions again. And Oscar will continue to use every platform he has to try and tear down the legacy of the man he once called his golden child. The viral footage we saw was raw, chaotic, and terrifying. It showed us what happens when corporate greed, broken trust, fragile egos, and pure physical power collide on the world's biggest stage. It proved that no matter how many hundreds of millions of dollars are on the line, boxing remains a blood sport fueled by deep, personal human emotion. Canelo Alvarez and Oscar De La Hoya gave us a glimpse of real, unfiltered hatred, and the combat sports world will be dissecting the fallout for years to come.